Welcome to the Online Strength Coach Podcast, episode 105. Today's topic comes from a question via email by John. If an athlete has a major imbalance or a wrong movement pattern leading to recurrent injuries, how would you balance the rehab process with normal training? Let's say for a powerlifter and has an aggressive rehab protocol, would you drop all strength training until the imbalance is fixed? Or would you try to balance both at the same time? Okay, so I think this question is quite an interesting one from a sense that rehab tends to be a lot about common sense outside of the technical side of things, which tends to be, this is fucked, you require this amount of time to let it recover, and here's a low-level introduction to training, and we're going to wrap this up to a full training process. When we talk about muscular imbalances, I think we have a term that's misunderstood or misapplied for a lot of times. People can assume that because someone, say, for example, back squats, and then they're maybe one of their knees, the knee on the left-hand side buckles in, the right one doesn't buckle, it stays in line. They can maybe think, well, obviously there's a muscular imbalance here. The left glute medius may be weak, can't produce enough external torque to keep the knee out tracking over the toe. That's causing it to bow in, and that's leading to what's being exhibited as a change in form or what seems to be a muscular imbalance. This is a very simplistic view of movement, very simplistic view of how the body adapts, how the body moves. It's never that simple. It's never that there's one muscle that's not acting enough. There's not one muscle that's not coordinated enough. There's not one muscle that's not strong enough. It's almost never the case. Where we get imbalances in reality is when there's a strain, or probably more pertinently, when there's a tear of a muscle. So, for example, if one thing we see quite a lot within aerobic players is torn pecs from tackling. I've dealt with at least 4 or 5 players who have had that injury. Same with any torn pec, it takes a very, very long time for it to come back to any semblance of where it was before. So one of our loose-head props tore his pec tackling before he signed with us. He had 180 kilo for 3 bench press before he came, and his best post-pec tear is probably about 160. And you can see when he's doing the bench press, it's not quite symmetrical, it's not quite the same. So in that scenario, what we do is we isolate. During the rehab process, what we'll do for someone with a torn pec or a torn muscle, we will leave it unloaded for as long as is prescribed or as long as recommended primarily by the surgeon, if there's been a surgical repair, or by the doctor if there's been a scan and they've decided to conservatively manage it, which is a term was utilized for letting it heal in its own time and not going in there and having a surgical intervention, reattaching the muscle, being the surgical intervention for a torn muscle. Now, what we do in this instance, so for a hamstring or for a pec that we're talking about, we'll do what we can unilaterally on the unaffected side. So in the case of a pec tear, what we'll do is follow a strength program as we can for that muscle. So we'll do 1 arm dumbbell press, 1 arm shoulder press, 1 arm pull downs, 1 arm rows, rotator cuff work, basically direct bicep, direct tricep work, mainly compound lifts. So what we get sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activation. So if we press on one side, we get some innervation of the muscles on the left-hand side. If the left-hand side is the affected side, and the right-hand side is the unaffected side, by doing what we can, utilizing the unaffected side, we get some crossover talk from the nervous system, which means we keep some muscle retention, which means the eventual muscle wasting is much less. Now, depending on the tear, for instance, this was a pec tendon tear, our loading strategies need to be changed and reflective of that, and this is all fed back from a surgeon, or it's all fed back or our medical team will ensure that what we do falls in line with this. So we might have to arbitrarily hold someone back. So once you come back to bilateral pressing, say maybe we normally wouldn't go straight back to barbell. We would normally adopt dumbbells because it allows more degrees of freedom, which allows the body to adapt a bit better to this new space, if you will. Because a torn pec doesn't really repair quite the same ever. And you'll probably find that, like Scott Mendelson's no longer competitive bench presser because of his pec tears and his various injuries. He's no longer able to bench what he used to be able to bench. But in this instance, what we would say is you can't go over this weight. So let's say 50% max for X amount of weeks, 6%, and just like we would just arbitrarily load it up. And this is like quite a slow process for this in particular injury. I think it was about 6 months before we really went into training again with Walton Abandon. But if this certain player gets enough time without contact, they're fine doing bilateral training like benching, rowing, and they can get stronger at it. Now they're about 20 kilos down on the previous bests. However, probably never going to get to where they were, just with the nature of the injury they had. And we talk about muscular imbalances. We talk about it in the namby-pamby sort of way, where my glutes aren't firing here, or my upper back isn't firing here, or my rotator cuffs aren't firing as well as they fire. These are like nonsensical terms. They're not really. It's never that easy to pull this out. There's normally with someone who exhibits something like a knee valgus, or someone who exhibits poor control on the bench press, or someone who exhibits poor muscular control on a pull-up, or someone whose scaps swing weird during a row, or someone who during a lunge like valgus in like fuck, or like regardless of the exercise, there's loads of movement variance, probably a better word than movement discrepancies, that we will notice when different body types and different shapes move. How a 6'11" rugby player moves in a squat, for instance, it's going to be completely different from me as a 5'11" powerlifter. We have different training histories, our tendon makeup's different, our limb length's different, our bone mineral density is different, etc., etc., etc. We're two distinct individuals, or two disparate individuals with different training histories, different anatomies, different genetic profiles, different nutritional makeup, different body compositions, blah 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 blah, different footwear, different bend, blah blah blah. Like, there's so many variances when it comes to movement. It becomes very difficult to put it into a nice neat package of, when your knee valgus is, these are the things you should do. Because it's a contextual problem, it's a problem that needs to be put in, that needs to have all the colour towards it. It could be that someone's exhibiting knee valgus on the left to go back towards our original example, because they're pushing in, they're rolling in on that foot, because they're not aware that they're meant to be pushing on the back and outside of their foot to keep the knees out, to engage glutes, to keep them out. It could be maybe they have a stagger stance, so maybe one side they've turned out 30 degrees of the foot, and the other one they're facing straight forward. So the foot that's facing straight forward, they haven't got that external torque on the foot, they haven't got that torque on the head of the femur, and that means when they push, the glute med's not really got one isn't pre-activated, and two hasn't got quite a good, isn't as stretched, so therefore can't act as strongly concentrically, and that means for that limb, they might valgus, because the glute med can't act on it to externally rotate the head of the femur, to externally rotate the femur. And what we can do to that person to say, turn your left foot out 30 degrees, or make sure that your feet are symmetrical, and then let's watch them squat. They've stopped valgusing. That's funny. Quite a lot of times it's down to technique, pretty much, or it's down to a lack of technique, or it's down to a lack of awareness. These things can be down to like lesser global strength, or lesser global strength can cause issues. Pretty good example is someone with poor upper back strength, or someone who maybe doesn't do a lot of upper body work might find it very difficult to stay in extension during a deadlift, or during a clean, or during a snatch, because they just haven't got as much muscle or as much cross-sectional area in their upper back to contract and pin their thoracic spine in extension, so they can get a more advantageous leverage for a deadlift, or clean, or a snatch. These are legit problems, but it's not to say that it's a muscular imbalance or it's a muscular activation. We just need to do more of this assistance work to bring that relative weakness up. There are similar things within the lower body, although I think it's kind of overblown with the lower body. Like hamstrings can be weak, quads can be weak, although quads are almost never weak relatively to the hamstring, so by far the stronger muscle group. Lifting's too closed of an activity for it normally not to be technical in nature. There are some things we can do, like we've already mentioned, such as upper back work, rotator cuff for bench press, etc., or even stuff like glute med work for squat for female athletes, or for longer athletes, taller athletes. Unilateral work's definitely something that can help some lifters. Some lifters find it very difficult to target the muscles of the leg utilizing bilateral movement, because they'll find that maybe the low back glutes take over, or maybe they squat and they move in such a way where they find it very difficult to activate the muscles of the leg or the muscles around the knee. Therefore, someone like Pete Rubish is an example of that, whose squat technique is fairly decent. It's not terrible, but he finds that it beats the fuck out of him. So he does single leg work almost primarily, and it works for him in his instance. Obviously, he maintains some form of global strength or some kind of global innervation by doing heavy deadlifts, and the single leg squats are enough to bring up the strength around the knee and the glutes, and then so he can leave bilateral squats out for a lot of his training and just do it in the build up to a meet, and that's enough to keep him getting stronger squat amongst the other things he's doing. That's not to say that's the best way of doing it, but that is to say that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And as always with these questions, it's not a straightforward answer. We can't say to you, I wouldn't lie to you and say, your elbows are flaring on the bench press, that means you have weak lats. I probably want to look at your technique first, look at how you're moving first, look at your grip, etc., because I would guess 9 times out of 10 we'll get to the root cause doing that. The other 1 time out of 10, then maybe it is there are work-ons that need to be done. But there's always work-ons that need to be done. There's never a case or never a lifter who doesn't have assistance work they can do that will help them in certain scenarios, or targeted assistance work, not general assistance work that will help them progress as a lifter. But it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of what we're going to get is going to come from getting better at movement, or working with someone who appreciates the movement, or working with someone who can help us get better at the movement. The other 20% of the time, we can utilize assistance or utilize programming that helps us in a more general sense. Okay, John, thank you very much for the question. Hope that's answered it. If you follow Propane Fitness, I'm going to be on their next podcast, which we're recording next Wednesday. So tune into that. I've also had an article published on Lead FTS. Check that out. 5 reasons why you're weak. If you want to catch me online, you can catch me at onlinestrengthcoach.com. Catch me at castironstrength.com. You can now catch me at leadfts.com. You can catch me on the podcast on YouTube, obviously, Speed Power Fitness. If you want to talk to me, or if you want to email me with any questions and inquiries, please direct your emails towards speedpowerperformance@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to this Strength Coach podcast. I've been Mark. I'll catch you in the next episode. Goodbye.